The verse goes like this. Chapter 2nd, verse 58, Bhagavad Gita. Yada samharate chayam kurmo aggani sarvashah. Yada samharte chayam kurmo agna sarvashah. Indriya arthabhyas tasya prajna pratisthita. Yada samharate chayam kurmo angani sarvashah. Indriyani indriya arthebhyas tasya prajna pratisthita. Yada, when, samharate, winds up or winds up, cha, also, I am, hey, kurma, tortoise, angani, limb, iva, like, sarvasha, altogether, indriyani, senses, indriya, arthebhaya, from the sense objects, tasya, his, pragnya, consciousness, pratishtha, fixed. Translation and purport by Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Hey, Prabhuji, we can't see your screen. Are you sharing a screen?
Okay, just a sec. Maybe I have not been able to share. Here. Can you see it now?
Thank you, Prabhuji.
One who is able to withdraw his senses from sense objects, as the tortoise draws its limbs within the shell, is firmly fixed in perfect consciousness. I'll read it again. One who is able to withdraw his senses from sense objects, as the tortoise draws its limb within the shell, is firmly fixed in perfect consciousness. Purport. The test of a yogi, devotee, or self-realized soul is that he is able to control the senses according to his plan. Most people, however, are servants of the senses and are thus directed by the dictation of the senses. That is the answer to the question as to how the yogi is situated. The senses are compared to venomous serpents. They want to act very loosely and without restriction. Yogi or the devotee must be very strong to control the serpents, like a snake charmer. He never allows them to act independently. There are many injunctions in the revealed scriptures. Some of them are do-nots and some of them are do's. Unless one is able to follow the do's and the do-nots, restricting oneself from sense enjoyment, it is not possible to be firmly fixed in Krishna consciousness. The best example set herein is the tortoise. The tortoise can at any moment wind up its senses and exhibit them again at any time for particular purposes. Similarly, the senses of Krishna consciousness persons are used only for some particular purpose in the service of the Lord and are withdrawn otherwise. Arjuna is being taught here to use his senses for the service of the Lord instead of for his own satisfaction. Keeping the senses always in the service of the Lord is the example set by the analogy of the tortoise who keep the senses within. Yada samharate chayam kurmo angani sarvashah indriyani indriya arthyabhyas tasya prajna pratisthita. Om Ajnanam Timrindasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Sapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Utapad Kamalam Shri Gurum Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadhvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Shri Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Tamscha. He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Deenabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute. Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Shri Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Vacha Patitanam Pavnebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Rama Hare Hare. So in this chapter second is actually the summary of entire Bhagavad Gita. And the rest of Bhagavad Gita only appear because Arjun, for the benefit of all of us, has asked questions uh, on, on various topics that Krishna has covered in chapter second. Therefore, you would see that perhaps all the concepts A to Z are covered in chapter second itself. Now, one who reads chapter second is able to read the summary of entire Bhagavad Gita in chapter second. And some very, very profound verses are spoken in chapter second. It's one of the most favorite chapters of all the chapters in Bhagavad Gita because it gives you a very comprehensive view of entire Bhagavad Gita. Now we understand that it is the chapter where there has been a turning point of Arjun coming into the battlefield and wanting to see who is he that he's fighting against. And at that point of time, he kind of loses his strength and he is now beginning to ask questions and he's beginning to accept Krishna as spiritual master. That's where from verse 213 onwards, Krishna started to talk to him about that who is he, what is the real identity of the living entity, and started to establish that living entity is not the body that is being seen, rather is the soul, which is embodied which is embodying the living entity. So it's the soul which is present in the body and not the body itself who is the living entity. And we see in the series of verses how Krishna started to explain now it's a new concept. And when there's a new concept introduced, the very purity of that new concept is being exemplified here by Krishna of describing what is soul. That soul never dies, that soul never takes birth, and the soul is eternal. It's always existing. It's primeval. It's not made of matter. It's not made of any material ingredients. It's indestructible. It is eternal. It's unborn. It cannot be destroyed by fire or withered by wind, or it cannot be destroyed by water. Krishna continues to explain that how a person puts on new garments. Similarly, the soul keeps putting on new garments, new bodies, and soul can never be cut into pieces by any weapon. So Krishna started to describe the eternal nature of the living entity. Soul is also not visible, and therefore you can't see the soul. It's not visible through the material eyes and material nature, because the nature of the soul is spiritual. And anything which is spiritual cannot be perceived by the material senses. So Krishna continues to give this understanding of the soul to Arjuna. Having understood the nature of the soul, that's where Arjun start to ask certain intelligent questions around soul now. That, okay, I am the soul and I'm not this body, then uh, then what is that body? And then, of course, Krishna also tells him about how an embodied soul, he gets identifying himself with the body, he gets enamored by the material world. And the soul then wants to use Vedas, which also gives a lot of information around how to achieve material things, how this living being get attached to the flowery words of the Vedas and start to work in such a way that he can achieve the fruits as heavenly planets or a very good birth or a lot of wealth and piety or power, which are necessary to spend good and comfortable life in the material world and live a life of sense gratification and opulence. So Krishna started to describe that what are, if the person who is the soul does not understand himself to be the soul and constantly believe that he is the body, then it is but natural for him to get attracted to Vedic information, which will then give you law of opulence and leads to the attachment to the sense enjoyment. And therefore, this person who is so much attached to the sense gratification will never generate or will never have the determination in his heart to do or perform devotional service. So Krishna has used the word vyavasatmika buddhi, means resolute determination will not arise in his heart because he will always looking towards the sense gratification. So this is coming in the way to become self-realized soul. So that's time Krishna, then Arjun kind of stops there and he says, okay, if that is so, then how do I identify a person who is self-realized person? Of course, Krishna also explains that it's only by devotional service to the Lord that one can come to the platform of realizing the truth that I'm saying and get out of the cycle of birth and death. So then the verse that we did last time I did was Sthit Pragyastaka Bhasha, Samadhistasya Keshava. So Arjun was asking that, what is the symptom of such a person? How does he speak? What is his language? How does he sit? What does he talk? So from here, Krishna is now building up that what is that kind of a person who has realized that he is the soul and who is not in the bodily consciousness. I can still hear some of the sounds. I'm going to put everybody on mute. Mute all. Okay. So now Krishna is explaining that one who is able to withdraw his senses from sense objects, as the tortoise draws its limbs within the shell, is firmly fixed in perfect consciousness. So one of the signs of a self-realized person, Krishna is now elaborating on that point. He's giving a very beautiful example or analogy of a tortoise. We have seen tortoise immediately withdraws his senses and gets into his shell. A shell is like very solid shell. You can beat it with the help of wood or hammer, it will still survive. So similarly, a self-realized soul will withdraw his senses. But what does that mean really? And our acharyas, our parampara have explained us. It does not mean that you become inactive. It does not mean that you now withdraw your senses and you don't perform your activities. Rather, it is explained to us that because the senses cannot live without the sense objects, you see, senses must run towards their sense objects. And in material world, this is a combination. There's sense objects created, and there are senses which are created. And there are material elements between the senses, sense objects, that there's an interaction between them. That gives some sort of pleasure to the living entity. With the eyes, living entity want to see beautiful things. With smell, nose, nice perfume. There's a whole industry of perfumes, you see, whole industry of beauty and makeup and fashion, which makes sure that we can see beautiful things through our eyes. And similarly, we want to hear nice sound vibrations, and there's a whole industry around that. So each sense is leading to development of whole big massive industry in its own in the material world, and thousands and millions of people are working towards ensuring that that particular sense object is created which can give satisfaction to the sense of that particular sense. So hair industry, beauty, skin industry, dermatologist. mm, Then there is perfumery, all kinds of colors, and fashion industry. Now we can see touch, the all kinds of skin creams that are available in supermarkets. So taste, there's a full food industry, hotel industry, all kinds of comforts to the body. Again, all kinds of hotels are made across the world, luxury hotels and all kinds of lounges at the airports and all kinds of comforts in the car, what not. Anything around us that we look at is nothing but an attempt by the living entity of this material world to create a comfortable situation for the senses to be able to enjoy. This is how the material world is perceived, because the consciousness is not the self consciousness or the self-realization consciousness or the soul consciousness. Consciousness is about the body consciousness. Person who is embodied, or living entity who is embodied in the body, is thinking himself of the body and therefore making arrangements to stay in this material world. And in this regard, there's a beautiful lecture by Srila Prabhupada, and which was spoken, I think, in Seattle on chapter 2, verse 19 to 25. Let me see if I can share the screen. Okay. So Srila Prabhupada is saying here, there's a conversation going between some of his disciples, and he's saying, this is Maya. Come on, enjoy me. Come on, enjoy me. As soon as you enjoy, you become entrapped. That's all. Then here, Srila Prabhupada is going to give examples, just like fishing tackle. They throw the tackle and invite the fish. Come on, enjoy me. Come on, enjoy me. As soon as a fish wants to eat that, she's finished. Where you go now? Come on in my bag. Yes, I will fry you nicely, you see. So Srila Prabhupada is giving example here. He'll give furthermore examples of a fish. Fish generally, they can't control their tongue. And to take the advantage of this, a fisherman generally put something to eat into the and throw the tackle and invite the fish, and fish gets trapped into the tackle and loses his life by eating through his tongue, because he cannot check the dictation of the tongue. So Prabhupada is saying, therefore, he's losing his life. Then he gives example of deer. Now, deer is very, very fond of listening to the nice melodious music. Hunters, they are very, very smart. They play very nice flute, and all the deers, they come and assemble to hear this nice melodious flute. And they don't know that the deer has kept his trap ready. As soon as they all come together, the hunter throws the trap, and all of them, they loses their life just because they wanted to hear nice sound. Similarly, we understand how do you trap the elephant? A very, very big elephant, such a big animal, living entity so small, a human being is so small, yet they're able to trap this elephant. Because this he elephant always wants to rub his skin against the she elephant. He becomes mad after she elephant. So what they do, they trap, they keep a domestic she elephant who is already captured and trained in the jungle, and they create a very, very big pit in front of that. It's a huge, huge pit, which is then covered by the grasses and the plants, leaves. And so a he elephant cannot see this pit from a distance. All that he can see is the she elephant standing on across the pit. So as soon as he sees, he runs after the she elephant. And she elephant is very well trained to stand there and make sure that she gives way to the he elephant. So the when male elephant comes closer to the she elephant, he gets dropped into the big pit, and that's it. Then he's shackled and he's taken away. And then a small Mahavat, or the controller of the elephant, sits on the top of the elephant after some time, and with very small stick, he controls the elephant. Do this, do that work, go here, go there. And they are used to be taken into the forest and uh, take the big wooden logs from one place to another, work very, very hard, or taken to the zoo, or do all kinds of menial things. Elephant has such intelligence, but he's completely lost because of this particular weakness of the skin. So Prabhupada is saying that's that black, what is called Brahmara. Another example he gives, it's a bumblebee. A bumblebee, it goes into the lotus flower, and as soon as it goes into lotus flower, it just smells the lotus flower, and it gets inside and start to suck the nectar of the lotus flower. And as the sun goes down, the quality of the lotus flower is that it starts to close. All the petals of the lotus flower, they open up by the sunrise and they close by the sunset. So that's how they're closely linked with sun. And as the sunflowers, the petals are closing down now, the bumblebee knows it, that soon after there will be no chance for him to get out of that flower. And he feels that, oh no, I can't leave this beautiful smell. Let me just drink this nectar a little bit more. And he goes on, and he's so intoxicated. Generally, bumblebee can pierce through the leaves of the lotus. Leaves of the lotus are not very hard, they're very soft. It can easily, but because so intoxicated and because there's no willingness and desire to come out, in due course of time, and then the lotus flower completely closes itself, the bumblebee is trapped inside, and there's no air to come through, and it dies and loses life. So Srila Prabhupada is saying these are the examples from animal kingdom, whose one sense is only active. So even one sense can be responsible to completely take you out of control. Now Prabhupada is saying that what in animal kingdom, their one sense is very, very active and powerful. But for living entity like us, all of our senses are very active. Then what is our position, you see? And he then throws an example from Bhagavad. He says, a man has got 6 wives. What are these 6 wives? There's mind, and there are 5 active senses. The nose, the ear, the eyes, the skin, sex, organs. They're like wives. And Sri Prabhupada says, as soon as the living entity enters the house, all the wives have captured him. You come to my room, you see? So one has taken his one hand, another has taken another hand, one has taken one leg, and so on. So he's like this. Where shall I go? You see? So this is our position. Human being, whether they shall control the senses, instead of controlling the senses, they are becoming servant of the senses. losing this great opportunity of human being. So this is the example from Srila Prabhupada's lecture, which clearly picks up the stories from Srimad Bhagavatam and anecdotes from Srimad Bhagavatam, tells us that how a living entity it so easily gets trapped by the senses. Now, in the same chapter, Krishna has already explained to Arjun, Bhogashwarya prasaktanam taya partha chetasam vyavasatmika buddhi samadhau na vidhiyate. And I just touched upon this, that if the mind is too attached to the sense enjoyment and material opulence, then the resolute determination for devotional service will not arise in their heart or will not take place in their heart. So we have to recognize this relationship between sense enjoyment and devotional service. They are inversely proportional. To the extent one has desire to enjoy the material life, to that extent, the determination to perform devotional service will not arise. And on the contrary, if one is able, one continues to perform devotional service, and the result of that would be that the attachment or detachment from material energy or sense enjoyment will come in the heart. You see? So if one is engaged in sense enjoyment continuously and not able to do the devotional service, the resolute determination of doing devotional service will not arise. But by the association of devotee, if one is able to put his mind and determination and concentration in doing devotional service, in due course of time, his attachment to the material sense enjoyment should go away. So in verse number 49 of the same chapter, Krishna has given this nice explanation. Durena hi avaram karma buddhi yoga dhananjaya buddhau sharanam anvichha kripanaha falahetavaha. Udhananjaya, keep all abominable activities far distant by devotional service, and in that consciousness surrender unto the Lord. Those who want to enjoy the fruits of their works are misers. You see, whole world is working towards the fruits of their work. They want to achieve something. Mode of passion means I would do activity to achieve some result, because then I can enjoy the result of my activities. And that enjoying mentality is the very trap of living entity. So Krishna is saying those who keep all abominable activities far distant by devotional service. What does it mean, abominable activities? Activities which will engage you, entangle you in the material bondage are abominable activities. It doesn't mean just not meat eating, not illicit sex, not gambling, not drinking, not intoxication. Even on the subtle platform, there is a tendency to enjoy the success. Sometimes, I mean, the failures, these are all sufferings, the waves of happiness and distress. Krishna has given this very beautiful verse, number 48 in chapter 2nd. Again, the chapter 2nd is so important. Yogastaha kuru karmani shangam adhananjaya siddhi asiddhayo samo bhutva samatvam yoga uchyate. He says, perform your duty at the post, O Arjun, abandon all attachment to success or failure. Such equanimity is called yoga. But living entity, he is running after, like a mad elephant, running after the fruits of his activities. And all the conditioned souls, they want to create opulence in this world, whether it's their house, whether it's their cars or gardens or nice property or nice job, some sort of identity in the society, as in trying to help others on a very philanthropic way, which gives you a lot of fame and name and success. So all of them are condemned actually. All of them are condemned by Bhagavad Dharma. The purity of the existence of living entity is explained in Canto 5 of Srimad Bhagavatam. There's an explanation of Jad Bharata. Jad Bharat was Bharat Maharaj, and he took renunciation from his kingdom. He was at the platform of bhava. So there are so many platforms of bhakti. When we come close contact with the devotees, we do devotional service called as bhajan kriya because of sadhu sangha or association of devotees. Due to devotional services that we do, we then get to the next stage, which is anartha nivritti, which means getting rid of the unwanted desires in the heart. And from going that stage, we come to the stage of nishtha, where our devotional service or our faith becomes very firmed up. And gradually, we rise to the platform of bhava and prema. So, with all these various stages of bhakti on the path of going back to Godhead, we come to various platforms of devotional service. And the stage of bhava is where Vajad Maharaj was present and was situated in that kind of constitutional position. That's one of the highest platform one can achieve on the material body, in the material body while present in the material world. So he came to the jungle, and one time he was giving oblations in the river, and suddenly he found a deer running towards the river. This deer was running after his life from a tiger or a lion. And this lion, and she was carrying a baby. And this lion was after the life of deer. Deer ran into the river. And as she was running into the river, the current of river were taking her across. She was trying to swim across the river out of the fear of tiger. And at the same time, in the process of running across the river, swimming across the river, she gave birth to this little deer, baby deer. She swam across, and this baby deer was now flowing with the current of river. In that current of river, Jad Bharat was paying his oblations to sun god, taking water from the river Ganges and giving to sun god like this. And in that point, he was thinking, oh, what a providence that this deer, baby deer, is going to drown and die. Shall I save this deer? And he then, out of mode of goodness, he decides to intervene the natural course of action that nature was taking, and he saves this baby deer, brings him out. As soon as he brings him out, he feels that, oh, this tiger might now come and eat this baby deer. So he quickly takes him to the roof, a thatch roof where he was living, and he protects the deer. And then he was wondering, how do I feed this deer? Because this deer must survive. There is no mother. So he tries to make arrangement for grass and all other kind of things that the baby deer can eat. In due course of time, his spiritual practice diminished and his activity to preserve the baby deer and to maintain the baby deer increased. In due course of time, he was almost entangled in taking care of the baby deer. So he left his attachment with the kingdom. He left his attachments with looking after such a big praja and leave all the luxury of the kingly luxuries. And he ended up coming to this stage where he got completely attached to this baby deer. He'll look at the baby deer in the morning, baby deer will move his neck, and then growing up, and he'll find him very enchanting. He will find the eyes very beautiful and attractive. he'll go and cut some grass for the deer. And he's thinking that he's okay, he's all right. He's doing his spiritual practices at the same time. But it so happened in due course of time, his attachment grew so much about this baby deer that constantly, by sleeping, while waking up, during the course of the day, hundreds of times, he's just thinking about this deer. And that unfortunate time came when Jad Bharat, living entity, has to leave his body. At that point in time, he was not situated in trance. He was not situated, his concentration was not about remembering the Lord or being engaged with the Lord, because he was so intensely engaged with the baby deer that he completely engrossed in the remembrance of baby deer, left his body. And guess what? Whatever one remembers at the time of death, yam yam bhavi smarana bhavam, that's the kind of body one will take. And that's what happened. In his next birth, Jad Bharat took the form of a deer. He took birth as a deer. But fortunately, his birth as a deer was very special because he was not an ordinary deer. He was a self-realized bird in the body of the deer. He somehow or the other, in the same jungle, passed his time feeding on the food of the deer, sleeping the way deer sleeps, living the life of deer. And after completing that yoni, he was then given birth, and he was completely, constantly meditating upon the Lord throughout the birth, throughout the period of being in the body of the deer. And he was given birth in a Brahmin family as a human. So this is his third life. And in that Brahmin family, as he was growing up, he knew and he realized fully that he was so fearful of his senses being engaged in the sense objects. He was constantly thinking, if I just do anything from my senses, they will entangle me, they'll entrap me in this material world. Therefore, he did not just engage his senses in the sense objects, which means he will not eat, he will not move, he will just sit down at place. Parents and his brothers, they all thought that this person, this child is a special child who hasn't got brains, who can't do things, who is disabled, not knowing that he was fully capable, fully intelligent, but he was not acting by his will and choice. And sometimes they'll feed him bad food, foul food, and parents will also think, okay, let go. And as soon as the food will enter his tongue and comes to the throat area, as soon as it enters where the taste comes, Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, will convert his food into nectarian, juicy, tasty prasadam. And then he'll eat it because it's not foul food. So one time, the body of Jad Bharat, because he became Jad, he became like a tree, he became like inactive. He was not active at all. His senses were not active. So he came out, and that time they thought that, okay, best is to put him as he can chase away the birds and the crows from the field. So he left them there. So the parents of Jad Bharat left him in the fields to look after the fields. And guess what? Jad Bharat was least bothered about the field and the crop. All he was bothered about that, I don't want to do anything of this material world, in this material world. And he was constantly praying to the Lord in his heart and chanting his holy mantras in his mind. He was remembering everything from his past and the past life. So there were these soldiers who were roaming around, and they all came to get hold of someone that they can put on sacrifice to satisfy the goddess of Kali for the pleasure of the king. So they found this very handsome looking, beautiful young man, and they thought, this is fantastic. They went close to him. He did not oppose. They got hold of him and captured him and put him into the cart and got him to the kingdom. At that point in time, The king felt very happy. What a handsome young man. When we sacrifice this man to goddess Kali, Kali will be so happy, will please her so much. So they took Jat Bharat to the sacrificial arena in the temple of Kali. And right opposite the deity of Kali, there was this arrangement where his head was now kept on an iron rod, wherein they will use a chopper to chop his head off. A very massive knife, round curved big knife. They'll chop his head off. As they were about to do this, but can you believe that Jat Bharat was not opposing at all? He accepted this as providence, as the will of the Lord. He knew that whatever is happening by the will of the Lord and by the material nature and the arrangements of the nature, and whatever his interventions are only going to lead to the entanglement in this material world. So all his senses were in control, like senses of the tortoise, are completely under control. He was not moving his tongue, he was not moving his hand, he was not opposing to anything. He was fearless. He was fearless to death. He knew that they're going to chop his head off. He let his head kept to be chopped off. In such a situation, just like Draupadi was surrendering, and towards the end of it, she completely gave up and she raised her arms now. No more her force will be able to save her, being stripped off in the sabha of the Dhritarashtra. So Krishna appeared and saved her. Similarly, in this situation, Krishna, now seeing his devotee completely dependent upon him, says to Mother Kali, one of his own energy, are you going to save him, or shall I come to save him now? And Mother Durga, she rose from the deity. She came out of the deity form and she started snapping off the heads of everybody and saved Jat Bharat from that ghastly scene. She destroyed all the others. And Jat Bharat then came out of that place and walked his way through. As he was walking his way through, the king of the another king of the land, King Rahuguna, was passing by. And King Rahuguna, he needed some people to lift, to carry him in a big palanquin. And they got hold of Jat Bharat. They said, this is a young, handsome man. And as they were walking on the palanquin, King Rahuguna's palanquin was going up and down and up and down. They said, whoa, who is this? Not able to walk properly. Don't you know I am the king? And they saw Jat Bharat. He was walking in a very unique way of trying to jump his steps more than the distance the others were doing. And why are you doing that? So then Jat Bharat spoke for the first time, because he was trying to save the living entities who might come under his foot, and he will be responsible to kill them. And he didn't want to accept this responsibility of killing anybody. At that time, there was a beautiful conversation between Jat Bharat and Rahuguna. Now, Rahuguna, as soon as Jat Bharat spoke, Rahuguna understood from his language that this person is a self-realized person. The moment he spoke, he understood. Bharat spoke, King Rahuguna immediately understood. And by that time, he has already insulted Jat Bharat by making him carry his palanquin and neglect him. Now he realized this is a Paramhamsa. This is a great devotee of the Lord. And he pays his obeisances to Jat Bharat now. And then Jat Bharat explains King Rahuguna about the material world and the forest and enjoyment of this material world. Now, there is a chapter in Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 5, Chapter 14. I planned to speak about it, but looking at the time now, I can't speak about it. Maybe in my next session, we can speak about it. The chapter is entitled, The Material World as the Great Forest of Enjoyment. In this chapter, how King Rahuguna was explained by Jat Bharat about the entire material creation as a forest of sense enjoyment. And what happens in this forest? What are the co-wives of the living entity that Srila Prabhupada was talking about is discussed in the following chapter. So chapter 14 is describing about the forest of enjoyment, and then chapter 17 is describing about the co-wives, which are the senses who are always with living entity, charming the living entity, plundering the living entity. It's such a naked truth given in these chapters. And then in the same canto fourth, chapter 28, there's a description of Puranjana, who becomes a woman in the next life, and why he becomes a woman, and how he was so controlled by the senses, and what happens in his next life, explained by Narad Muni. So these are some of the beautiful pastimes which we'll try to cover in the following sessions. But for today, we will stop here and see if there is any question or comment on the topic explained so far. Hare Krishna. Okay. Is there anything coming to the chat? Okay, I can see some question here. Does anybody who uses his senses to enjoy the material world have to come back to the material world, even if devotional service is performed at the same time? So we discussed in a few classes, unless living entity comes to the point of Shunya Idam Jagat Sarvam Govinda Vidahename, Lord Chaitanya in his Shikshashtakam prayers has explained that how he's bereft when he's away from Lord Shyam Sundar. How is he feeling? Shunya Idam Jagat Sarvam. Everything looks like zero to him. Everything looks like zero because there is no engagement for his senses. So his senses are always engaged in the service of the Lord, in seeing the beautiful form of the Lord, eating prasadam of the Lord. Like Maharaj Ambrish, we read some story of Maharaj, pastimes of Maharaj Ambrish, how his all senses were actively involved in the service of the Lord. And that's how our parampara, our Gaudiya Vaishnava parampara is so special, because it does not ask you to become inactive. It asks you to become engaged. Senses should become engaged in the rightful constitutional position of serving the Lord. And by doing so, the senses will become purified. If our senses are not purified enough, of which the mind is the king of all the senses, if our mind is not purified enough, which means mind still desire to enjoy through the body the material world, in all such occasions and cases, even if we have iota of that desire, living entity will have to come back to the material world, and material nature will be obliged to provide those sense enjoyments and sense objects and that kind of a body to the living entity so he can fulfill his desires. But if the desires are changed, if the desires are purified, the contaminated desires are purified. What do you mean by purified? Means that not enjoying myself anymore, just giving enjoyment to the senses of the Lord and his devotees. In that situation, the material nature, even if it wants to give a material body, even if it wants to give material sense objects, because there is no desire, which is the very motivation of the living entity to enjoy, there is no such desire to enjoy the material world. The only desire is to serve the Lord. There is no reason that material living entity will have to be in the material world, because he would then be situated in the spiritual world where he can do this activity. In material world, this activity is very rare and difficult. In spiritual world, this is the only life that living entity is living. That's the only purpose of living, to serve the Lord. And therefore, he will not have to take birth in this material world. So if we perform devotional service, at the same time we have material attachments, to the extent we have devotional service performed, to that extent we'll be given next birth to be able to continue our devotional service. But if we forget that, we get entangled back into the material activities with the feeling of material enjoyment, then we will have to stay entangled unless we purify ourselves completely. And that's the answer to that question. I hope that answers the question, Jai Prabhu. Then we have Namrata Mataji mentions that, Prabhuji, thank you for enlightening us. Thank you, Mataji. Okay, if there is no other question, okay, I can see one more question come through.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna, Mataji.
It's not a question, just to sum up what you said. I love the idea, the example of the bumblebee. And we have got better senses, yet we get caught with the greed that surrounds us. Instead of taking what we need, we become greedy and greedier. So it's a good lesson, really. I think that's a real good lesson to take forward.
Thank you, Mataji. Thank you. There's another quick comment or a question on the chat. Hare Krishna, Pranam. Thanks for the informative session, especially the lecture on senses. In real world, restriction of senses can be practiced instead of totally inhibiting. Also, if senses are venoms, then everyone is guilty a little, to say the least. In the material world, if one is kind and does charity, etc., will that help? Thank you. Okay, so that is the reason we cannot inhibit our senses. Our senses has to be engaged. Our mind cannot stay without thinking. Therefore, this whole conception of thoughtlessness of Buddhism, wherein you concentrate on void or nothingness, and then once you leave your body, you go and merge in this complete nothingness, or a void wherein you will have no feelings, no sense of existence. This is not supported by the philosophy of devotional service in Krishna consciousness. Senses has to be engaged in the service of the Lord. So the recommendation is never to inhibit the senses. Rather, we control the senses in a way that we utilize them in the rightful purpose. We sing the chanting of the Harinam, we go and distribute the books, we eat prashadam, we work in a nice professional way of our occupational duty, in Brahminical activity or Kshatriya activity or Vaisya activity or Sudra activities, and we offer the fruits of our results to Krishna. We do not use that money for sense gratification. Rather, we utilize that fruits or the money in the service of the Vaishnavas, in the service of the Krishna, in service of Krishna. It's important that what kind of charity we do. Charity, if we just give away to a hospital, if just we give away for some food, etc., is a good pious activity, and it will bear some good results. Those good results, as mentioned in the flowery language of the Vedas, would be that you'll be entitled to go to the heavenly planets and enjoy the lives of the demigods. But that is not what a devotee desires. A devotee desires complete freedom from the material energy. And he wants to be situated in the divine energy, Srimati Radharani, not under the clutches of Durga Devi. And therefore, all the activities of charity must be done for the Krishna conscious activities. All the act of philanthropism must be engulfed and done under the current of Krishna consciousness to support the cause of Krishna consciousness, to deliver the living entity of this material world from the clutches of Maya and bring them back to the lotus feet of Lord Chaitanya. And once we do the activities in such a way, then this is the secret formula that we will be able to get out of the entangle of birth and death of this material world. This is the purport and summum bonum of the entire verse that we read today. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Yes.
Do you mind if I ask a small question, Prabhuji, or is there no time? If we run out of time also, that's fine, Prabhuji.
Please go ahead, Surya Prabhu, quickly, no problem.
Dandot Pranam, Prabhuji. Just, you see, this sloka is very interesting. Like, if I think about myself, like, I'm nowhere near that level, but like, say, at one point of time, I used to work without asking for anything in return, just do my job sincerely and not expecting money, not expecting anything, just do the job sincerely, do what we are supposed to do. But then, and do prayers later on when there's free time in the weekend or evenings, do prayers, that kind of thing, or go to temples. But then somehow it happens, Prabhuji, I don't know why, but we get promoted or we get money uh, or a house or things like that. And then we get family and things change. Like you're telling the story, there are a lot of stories in the Puranas. Like, so sometimes like controlling the senses, you're talking about, sometimes people just don't like eating prasadam in the family, but they want to eat outside. They want to eat some spicy food or something. And then if you're saying, no, we want to only eat prasadam, it doesn't, is not always congenial. Or if we always say, let's go to temple, but they want to go to some other places, then it's like children, they'll want to go to a movie or something, then it's not congenial. So how do we balance, Prabhuji,
Yeah, okay,
these
so
kind of things?
you can go and you can do the thing.
Yes, thank you, Surya Prabhu. Very brilliant question. These are some practical aspects of our life. Now, see, when you are in love, if you remember, if somebody has fallen in love, do or die, whatever comes in the way, the lover would make sure that somehow or the other he meets his beloved, and make sure that somehow or the other, if he has to tell the whole world lies about it, and rather he would make sure that nobody else get to know about his meetings, his beautiful period of that time that he wants to spend with his beloved. So the intensity and the desire to love is so powerful, so intensified, that one is willing to do anything or everything to meet the beloved and make sure that he's pleasing the beloved, giving the gifts and making the promises, making the life beautiful, or whatever it is. Nobody else must know about it, isn't it? Similarly, when we are in love with Krishna, it is an internal feeling of intense love with Krishna. Right now, because of our blunt senses, unfortunate situation is that we are unable to realize the intensity of that love. But when we read the scriptures, when we see some ideal examples, when we see the love of gopis, when we see the love of the friends of Krishna, even the acharyas, when we read their heart and in love, they are willing to do anything. They don't have to necessarily tell anybody. Similarly, a grahastha is supposed to be loving Krishna, but if required, he would make sure that he doesn't need to tell anybody. He would just cultivate his internal Krishna consciousness if he's in a difficult situation. So, in such a situation, if he's not able to tell others that you do what I want to do, or you do the way I want to do it, or he has to make some compromises externally, internally he's behaving like that paramour, a lady when he's in love with somebody else other than her husband, then she's constantly making sure that her husband is pleased by all means, so that there's no agitation in her meetings with her paramour. And this example is given in Shastra, not from the material point of view, it's not a great example, but from the point of view of spiritual life. A living entity who is in love with Krishna would behave like that paramour, would always be making a show that he is in love with all the material things and it's all right, He will not make a fuss around things, but somehow or other he'll adjust his life in such a way internally. He will cultivate this desire to love Krishna and express his devotional love with Krishna. And one day, when the right time comes, Krishna will provide that opportunity to a living entity, because he would have developed enough intense devotional service attitude within, that the circumstances will have to be now changed by the material energy and make favorable for that person to perform his devotional service. So there might not be immediate here and now plug and play solution to this, but if the endeavor and determination continues, then the fruits of that endeavor, determination within, will come in the form of beautiful devotional service that we'll be able to give to Krishna. Does that make some sense, Surya Prabhu?
Yes, Prabhuji, that's very helpful. Thank you.
There is a question, and I do want to take this very small question. Clutches of Durga Devi. We worship Durga Mata also, Prabhuji, Hare Krishna. So, Surbhi Mataji, the very first principle of given by Srila Prabhupada is that we do not disrespect any living entity. What to talk about the demigods? Durga Devi is the external energy of the Lord, material energy of the Lord. Durga means killa, fort, and Durga means Devi, demigoddess, who takes care of this fort. Now, what does she? She has got Trishul in her hand, and she makes sure that all the living entities who are not favorable to Lord Krishna, to her own Ishtadev, Krishna. Lord Shiva is the consort of Mother Durga, and Lord Shiva is expansion of Lord Krishna. Now, anybody who is not following the laws of the nature and who are opposed to the spiritual world, because in the very first place they wanted to enjoy separately from the Lord, therefore they are sent to this material world. So spiritual world is under the care of personified internal energy of Krishna, which is Radharani, and the material world is under the control of Durga Devi, and therefore the world clutches of Durga Devi, because from this material world it is not easy to get out from the death and birth cycles, and one prays to Mother Durga with folded hands to ask for material boons. Mother Durga will be very happy to give it very easily. But if one prays to Mother Durga to get me closer to the Supreme Lord, that time Mother Durga will see whether you are qualified to do that or not, because to get out of this material world you have to have no material desires, and therefore the terminology used was clutches of Maya. Clutches of Maya. Maya is the word used, the personified deity of Maya is Mother Durga, hence the clutches of Durga Devi. So no offense to Mother Durga, we all pray to her. She is insurmountable material energy of the Lord. Mamu Maya Dhurattaya, Krishna has already declared nobody can surpass my material energy, but that person can surpass the material energy who surrenders to me. Mama eviye prapadyante Maya. So that person can easily cross over the material world. I hope I have explained this one point, Surbhi Mataji. If there is anything else I can explain, we can talk later after the class.
Thank you so much. I'm trying to understand. Thank you so much, Hare Krishna.
We can talk about someday the positions of different gods and goddesses and demigods that we know and understand. That'll give us a very good perspective of everybody. But we respect her, and whenever we bow down to Mother Durga, our only prayer is, oh Mata, please, please, please let us relieve from this material energy and from the pranks of these three modes of material nature, and allow our senses into the service of the Lord.
Krishna, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Surbhi Mataji. So I think it's already 8 past 21. We have crossed the time limit defined by our organizers. My apologies for that. Pancha kalptarubhyascha kripa sindhu vacha patitanam pavnebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namah. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Ram Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna.
Hare
Hare
Krishna,
Krishna.
Prabhuji.
Hare
Thank you,
Krishna.
Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna.
Lila
Hare Krishna,
Prabhuji.
Prabhuji.